Can I wish you all good morning? I am in a slightly hesitant state in that as the chair, it's always better when all the speakers have arrived. But we're going to start this session. Hopefully the third speaker will have arrived just before they're meant to arrive. So if I look slightly nervous, it's not because I'm not expecting reaction from you, it's because I'm looking forward to a speaker arriving and not wanting to play dumb when those slides come up. So first let me introduce, so I'm Tim Drye, chair of Doug, and hopefully you'll get to know me a little bit better shortly. And I want to introduce you to this whole topic, which actually is, and hopefully you'll see quite soon, is quite close to my heart. But despite that, I was triggered to actually make it the subject of our conference this year, because last year I had the terrible recognition that having prepared virtually all the speakers, I'd ended up with a string of speakers that were all white, male and middle class. And thankfully, ONS fortunately sent along one female person to contribute and save myself by the skin of the teeth. But I felt, frankly, dreadful having done it, knowing that even when someone really cares about it, you can even easily slip into this situation. So I thought the best way to stop it is today actually make it the subject. So I'm really fascinated as well by how, in the current climate, particularly with GDPR, analysing diversity has become much harder to do because it's all based on data which is now being defined as sensitive and therefore requires permission to use. But the consequences of getting it wrong have been ranked up. So now you can get hit by the Equal Opportunities Commission, and it's no longer an excuse that you didn't intend to discriminate. If you actually discriminate by using automatic profiling, for example, you are liable to the Equal Opportunities Commission's rules and regulations, so it gets a bit serious. But not only is there a big stick now, I actually think there's a massive carrot, and that's why I linked together the analysis of diversity with the diversity of analysis. And I genuinely think that having diverse teams and teams with a whole variety of different perspectives makes for better analysis and outcomes. And I'll hopefully convince you a little bit more of that later. So I'm just going to give you a little light-hearted introduction to begin with.
There's a new kid in school with a crazy family, some seriously weird habits, and an unforgettable name. What's your name? The teacher asks. Weir. That's an interesting name. What's your surname? Doe. Doe? Uh-huh. Your name's Weirdo? Weirdo! Okay, here we go. In exactly 3 seconds, all the kids will start laughing. 1, 2, What's your sister's name? Play-Doh. What's your father's name? Taekwondo? Fitting in won't be easy, but it will be funny. Find out what happens to Weir in the hilarious new book.
So this is you'll find out I have a great interest in following children's stories and how they make you think about philosophy. This is one about a boy called Weirdo. And why do I make the reference to Weirdo? Well, actually, Weird is an acronym. It's one and I've just invented another one called SWAMP, and you'll see what that stands for in a minute. So Weird is Western, educated, industrialised, rich, and democratic. And what one it's often said, so I'm definitely weird. I'm actually proud of being weird, but for a whole bunch of other reasons. But what's really important is that we remember that a vast amount, in fact, virtually all psychological research is done on a weird sector of the world's population. There's a very small proportion of us that fit that category, but nearly all research is done on that group. I'm one of them. SWAMP. This is the one which I came up with. So I am straight, white. I did ask someone else what the A stand for, and they suggested arrogant. Middle-aged, male, and Protestant. Again, I think, and it's important, I think that we all recognise, and the reason I'm doing that now is we all recognise where we come from, and we're open about where we come from, because that does definitely adjust the way we analyse things. And I should have told you to put your phones on silent.
That's someone calling you.
So if you can make sure you put your phones on silent, that would be great. But I'll do that myself now. Thank you. So, well, what you could also call me, and that's just I'm also the local town mayor of my town in St Ives, Cambridgeshire, hence the photograph, which is, again, a slightly unusual occupation, and like to sit in teacups. One of the great advantages of being town mayor is you get to open the local Michaelmas fair, and with that you get free rides on everything. So I was able to indulge my inner kid. But alongside it, I am also a flat cap wearing economic migrant of a dying culture. So I come from Barnsley, and that's one of the reasons I wear a flat cap is I am proud of being an economic migrant. And I actually think it used to be, some of us of a certain age used to know, and we were actually told to get on our bikes. And that was from some of the more right-wing politicians. So it was at one time a good thing to be. And I like to remember the culture of people in mining towns where I grew up, where things were slightly different from what I'm used to nowadays. So I'd rather be remembered, and it's quite interesting, walking in with a flat cap as mayor into a local town, the stir it causes. But I'm also aware of how some people don't think anything wise can be spoken out of someone with a hat on. And so I like to see the surprise sometimes when I say something intelligent. But I'm quite fortunate in the sense I have a choice of looking unusual. Other people don't, but I like to choose and be slightly odd. Now, what that then arose, and I thought it was important to bring up today as well, is I was listening to the radio this week, and it was a subject. It was about what were the most important words in our culture at the moment. And this particular woman said that one of the most important words was this word, safe place. And I was quite struck, but I did think it was quite relevant to today. And I hope what we can do now is talk about some of these issues that can be very personal, but provide a safe place to speak about it. Safe places has arisen recently because of how we discuss LGBT issues and how we discuss trans issues, but it can also apply to how we discuss all sorts of bits of background. As is seen, I don't have a particularly unusual background in this context, although when I go to India, it's dramatically unusual. But I'm deliberately telling you all sorts of things about myself, just so that hopefully you feel able to do it. Even if you don't do it from the public, you also might do it when you're talking amongst each other. So I hope today is a safe place for people to say what they want and how they feel and how that might affect analysis. So one of the things I do want to share is I'm a critical realist. And the reason I do this, I think we analysts are sometimes somewhat philosophically naive, if you like. And the reason I say this is that I think, and I know that not everybody thinks, that the reason I want and aspire to diversity is I think that there are real differences. There are real differences between people, and that's what makes a team great. Now, other people think diversity is an important issue because they would class themselves as an idealist. And as an idealist, they're saying that the reason we should have diverse teams is because everybody underneath is the same. So I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. I'm just saying my own opinion is that if I had a menstrual cycle, I would probably have a chance of thinking things differently. But I don't. So I am likely to think in some things in other ways. But one of the things that I love about data is it requires us to address some really other significant philosophical issues. One is the difference between an individual and a group. And this is where words get really difficult when we're talking about data. In that I can say having a menstrual cycle is likely to change the way you think about things, but it's not necessarily the case about a particular individual. I've done a lot of work recently on how to analyse and use data within the recruitment of employees. And that's where you see this confusion between applying characteristics to individuals and applying to the groups have disastrous consequences. So you see people assuming that because they've got a score, particularly on a psychological assessment, that that individual will perform in a certain way in a job. That's definitely confusing an individual and a group. And I don't know, this is one of my favourite films. I don't know if you recognise it's The Life of Brian, and this is the shot where Brian is giving them all great advice and shouting out, you're all individuals, and they're all, just about, all shouting back, we are all individuals. Does anyone know which one isn't? It's that guy there. He's the one who shouts out, I'm not an individual. Great film. And again, an illustration of all sorts of great philosophical issues. But what I most love about data, and I know lots of people come to data because they think it's going to give you a clear answer to things. But what I love about data is it makes you illustrate when you cannot ever get a clear answer, and you have to make choices. And this is an illustration. I don't know if you heard in the press now, but the American justice system has now started to use models to decide whether or not someone's going to skip bail. And it's been introduced in a whole variety of different states. And they gaily initially suggested that what this showed was that every ethnic group had the same probability of being correctly chosen to skip bail. And all had the right probability, which turned out to be the case. But then someone else pointed out, it was a couple of years later, that whilst everybody had the same probability of skipping bail, different ethnic groups had different probabilities of wrongly being attributed. So you're all aware of the contingency tables. What sits on the diagonals was all okay, but what it showed was that blacks were much more likely to be wrongly attributed to skipping bail, and whites were much more likely to be wrongly attributed to not skipping bail. So the individuals were incorrectly assessed. Now, what subsequently follows from that, and the real challenge, is that actually no contingency table can ever satisfy both criteria. It's logically impossible. The only time those two criteria can ever match is if the two populations are identical. If the two populations are identical, you suddenly haven't got a problem. So what this is an illustration to me of is that actually underneath machines and underneath analytics, we still always have to make choices about what is fair. We have to make a choice about whether it's fair to get things right equally or about whether it's fair to get things wrong equally. Fair to get things right is a good idea if you want to maintain the status quo. Making fairness right about getting things wrong is a good idea if you want to change the status quo. But they are all choices which we sometimes make by accident because we haven't considered them, but which other people who aren't necessarily analytical should have a say in. And this is because I worry that in our development and our, if you like, anthropomization of machines, so we make machines sound like humans. We talk about them learning, we talk about them having intelligence. We forget, I think, their ethnicity, if you like, their diversity. We're assuming that we're building androgynous, and I should choose better words because I'm having a difficulty saying androgynous machines. But I seriously don't think we are. I think that actually what we're seeing is a whole set of Californians reflected back in the mirror underneath a whole series of machines. Quite subconsciously, we're seeing the decisions and the priorities of a set of Californians predominantly, because that's where the power of data science currently is, deciding what's happening, where we're all assuming, and lots of the politicians, I think, are assuming as they introduce AI, that what they're introducing is a vanilla thing that's taken out all those potential prejudices. So I want those to be brought to the surface and just make us aware of those in our application of what is definitely great things. So just alongside this, some statistics that the women in data people provided. So We have to consider then that currently there's 26% of data professionals are women. I actually think, given the next line, that only 7% of tech is, that actually the data professionals are doing better. I'm not saying we should be complacent, but we're doing better. I've got to say, sadly, we haven't quite met the 26% proportions today, but Doug will have to try and address that. But if you like, that's the stick. But what we also see is those carrots, that quite how diverse teams in terms of gender here, but I'm confident it's in terms of other things, diverse teams perform better. They particularly perform better in many and varied situations like startups. So diverse teams are typically more adaptable, typically less likely to just go with the status quo. And so there's real opportunities. So I hope, and I'm going to come back to one of my other themes, that you find great wisdom in some children's storybooks. This is one I came across, I was reminded of about 6 weeks ago. It's the story of someone who's given this toll booth and sent into a world where there's two different cities. One's called Dictionopolis, the other's called Numerologist. And the whole theme of the subject is that you can't have wisdom without both words and numbers. I don't quite like the phrase rhyme and reason because it suggests it's only numbers that are reason. But we need both. We need to balance. We need in our own work to think about how we're being addressed. And I hope today enables us to address the issues rather than hiding them, as some people want us to do, but also always consider how our backgrounds and how our viewpoints are adjusting the analysis that we produce. Because if you don't, I suspect things all happen subconsciously. So bring things to the surface today, I hope. Discuss them openly in a safe place, and hopefully at the end as well, we'll have better analysis too that helps everybody else.